I just found out that this book is, at its cheapest price, $840 more than the paperback of 5 years ago. So, Francis Asbury continues with Chapter 1, The Peasant's Son. The accidents of birth account for little. Francis Asbury, the real founder and first bishop of the Methodist Church in North America, was born the son of an English peasant and passed his early years under conditions that spoke no syllable of prophecy concerning the illustrious career he was destined to complete. The story of Asbury's childhood, as told by himself, is of meager and homely detail, and he even leaves us in doubt as to the exact date of his birth. This he, however, fixes as either the 20th or 21st day of August, 1745 of the Common Era. The terseness with which he has sketched the entire chapter of his early life is exceedingly tantalizing, but as no other hand known to us has attempted to enlarge the record, we must be content to draw from the brief and unembellished autobiography. The spot made famous as the birthplace of Asbury is described in his journal as being situated near the foot of Hampstead Bridge in the parish of Handsworth, about 4 miles from the Birmingham in Staffordshire. But that was Birmingham of the first half of the 18th century, the Birmingham destined to see the perfecting of the steam engine and the steel furnace, and to become the synonym of industrial magic long ago, enclosed within its wide-reaching suburbs, the site of the peasant father's coat. So much that concerning even its identity must be left to conjecture. But of how little consequence is this? Homer is Homer, wherever his birthplace. The main significance of Asbury's life belongs to another hemisphere than that which held the once green fields and bucolic homes of Handsworth Parish. The efforts of well-meaning biographers to amend the social rank of Asbury's family are without profit, as they are without justification. Joseph Asbury, the father of Francis, was of humble antecedents, and the lineage of his mother was no prouder. Asbury himself plainly says that his parents belonged to the stock of the common people. As a means of livelihood, the father followed gardening for the rich families of the parish. Moreover, his plainness of intellect comported with his rank and fortune, and suggests no explanation in heredity of the greatness of the son. He appears to have found time outside of his days of hire to cultivate the scanty acres that lay about his cottage itself, leased from some feudal landlord. The produce of these acres, with his wages, constituted his entire income. The family of which he was the head ate its bread in the sweat of one honest face. A somewhat sinister touch has been given the paragraph devoted by most of the bishop's biographers to the elder Asbury. This appears to have come about mainly in consequence of the absence of a definite testimony from the son, whose account of his parent is summed up in a few respectful allusions. The negative record is not an impeachment, nor even a depreciation. Beyond any doubt, Joseph Asbury was a man of real, if still of simple worth. He had excellent points, and though evidently not of an assertive spirit, enjoying the respect of honest men and the reverence of his own household. In such faith and sturdiness as his, the Commonwealth of England has been grounded since Runnymede, and these also furnished the soil in which the seeds of the Wesleyan revival took ready and lasting root. The mother of Asbury, like the mother of the Wesleys, was devout and actively religious. Moreover, she was, for her station, a woman of exceptional intelligence, and this counted in the rearing of her son for more than enhanced rank or fortune. Her manner was serious and quiet, and her judgment, tempered by an unfailing charity, was always clear and safe. In his maturer years, the son extolled her as the tenderest of mothers, and it is certain that the affectionate encomium was merited. The early death of an only daughter had chastised her spirit and generally accentuated her devotional habits. In his journal, the bishop has drawn a picture of his mother as he saw her in his childhood days, standing by a large window, poring over a book for hours together. The touch is simple enough, but in connection with the reader's instinctive remembrance of a tiny mound, white with hawthorn petals, in Handsworth's ancient churchyard, it takes on the sanctity and beauty of an elegy. Asbury's strong, early moral and religious bent may well be supposed to have come from his mother, though in the matter of training their son, she was not without sympathy and help from her husband. Both were zealous members of the established church, and in their humble home they kept alight the lamp of prayer. Nor was that home a stranger to outside influences. So alert and spiritually sympathetic was Elizabeth Asbury that she constantly attracted to her hearthstone religious teachers capable of imparting the soundest and most helpful instruction. In time, she came herself also to be a leader of devotional meetings held amongst her female neighbors. Thus she created about the life of her only son unusual religious conditions, the influence of which wrapped his after years in solitudes of apostolic sanctity. Well, it used to be that there'd be a house of worship locally, and that was pretty much your option of where to go. But for the knowledge which we have of this maternal devotion and care, and the simply fervent religious atmosphere pervading his early home, it would be difficult to receive unquestioningly the account given by the bishop in after years of his boyish rectitude. The climax of this early ethical sense is expressed in the declaration that he had neither dared an oath nor hazarded a lie. Scarcely less exceptional is the testimony that when his early companions were found to be vile, he could not join them in their offenses, but grieved in secret over their impurities. The world has had its souls of childhood, over which the epiphany of Bethlehem has prevailed. There have been those who were sanctified from their mother's wombs, nor do they belong wholly to the ancient world. The name of the peasant's son, for whom was reserved the apostleship of the New World, is not unworthy to be mentioned with those of Isaiah and John the Baptist. The soul that sacrificed and toiled and grew ever wider and stronger, preaching the gospel in the American wilderness, had drawn its life from far-off sources and through channels of unwanted purity. Well, calling it apostolic doesn't quite make sense, but he considered himself to have the mission to be passing on a message. It indeed belonged to a mysterious order and employed its active testimony. The unused and unsuspected forces that slumber in religion. Poor at best were the educational advantages provided for the peasant children of England in the 18th century, but they were often rendered still further impossible by reason of the brutal system of pedagogy then in vogue. This system has been mercilessly, though only too justly, caricatured by Charles Dickens in Nicholas Nickleby, and in the methods credited to old Squeers of Do the Boys Hall, the master of the Staffordshire school to which young Asbury was sent, proved to be a veritable old Squeers. The piously reared lad lacked the pugnacity of a Nickleby. Perhaps he lacked a certain wholesome worldly mindedness, and so did not resist the tyrant of the fair rule. Instead, when beaten by the churlish master, he had recourse to tears and prayers in secret. But the generation of Squeers neither heard prayers nor indulged in the foible of mercy, largely as the result of the cruelty which was visited upon him, but possibly also because of the absence of educational ideals. His parents, pious and devoted though they were, it was decided that the future bishop should make his way without further training in school. Piety and probity are not always wisdom. Even love, the master passion of the human breast, is fallible, often even to blindness. But when God and nature fashion a great man, they not only set a sign upon his outward members, but they leave a secret in his heart, which he must needs manifest in spite of lacking fortune or imperfect ministries. In a time when unseen forces wrought upon him, the son of the peasant manifested his secret. But in tender years, he was withdrawn from school and did not again take up seriously the pursuit of knowledge until a maturer age and a newer inspiration set him upon the difficult task of self-help. Nevertheless, at the age of 7, he had learned to read and found in the heroic books of the Bible a literature that stirred his thought, so genuinely insinuating and inspiring are those matchless epics and chronicles of the Hebrew Scriptures. And that's what myth is supposed to be, rather than table fiction, armchair fiction. As well as can be judged from the scrappy material upon which we are building, the cutting short of Asbury's school-going occurred some time after he had entered his 11th year. He must therefore have had 3 or 4 years of more or less continuous training, which will account for the fairly rudimentary foundation on which his latter learning was built, and education being now no longer considered, the lad must begin to earn his own bread. To that end, service was accepted for him in the house of a Staffordshire gentleman of rank and means, and, as the story goes, of ungodly life and habits. Nothing more certainly argues the humble state of the Asbury family than this going of the only child, while yet of tender years, into service. Nothing short of necessity could have induced the pious gardener and his wife to consent to such an arrangement for their son, but it betrayed their homely view concerning the career to which Providence had destined their offspring. Peasants they were, nor could they look beyond the horizon of their peasant lives, or if so, they dreamed not how it might be widened for them or theirs. The social estates of the 18th century England were separated by almost impassable barriers. The Wesleyan Reformation, more than any other force, broke down barriers and made the bulk of the peasantry a great middle class in English life. It also made this middle class intellectually potent. The entrance of young Asbury into the service of the Staffordshire gentleman was, in some respects, another case of Joseph in the house of Potiphar. The surroundings were unfavorable to piety, but the well-taught and prayer-guided youth escaped serious contamination, though he speaks of awakened pride as a consequence of his new relations. But his term of service was destined to bring a double reward. The family in which he served was a polite one, and seems to have affected the best code of manners known to the English gentry of that day. The courtesies and habits of gentiality must needs have impressed the sympathetic youth, accustomed to solitude and social isolation. He cannot have been an apt observer of the manners of the great people whom he served. At least one of his biographers is led to believe that it was during this service that Asbury himself acquired the ease of manner and action that afterwards made him appear so much at home in the houses of the aristocratic people of North America. Thus are the parables of Providence expounded. Thus does destiny neglect no smallest element in fitting men to fulfill her high degrees. It would be a safe undertaking to show that the stay of Joseph in Potiphar's house contributed largely toward preparing him for lordship over all the lands of Egypt. So was Asbury, while a servant in the house of his rich neighbor, fitted in one of the particulars necessary to the success of his apostolate in the New World. One finds the spiritual work as in some of the lowliest of tasks, or, well, not quite a lowly task as a servant of, but you know what I mean. In the outer sense, doesn't seem to have value other than a job. Most jobs are like that. The good sense and religious instincts of Asbury the Asburys probably suggested an early termination of their son's relations to an ungodly master. So after a time, probably about a year, the arrangement ended, and the lad was latter apprenticed for a period of 6½ years to learn a trade. There is some doubt as to the character of this trade, Asbury being, as it would seem, designedly silent on that point, as upon so many other matters relating to this period of his life. Some say that it was the trade of a saddler, while others have it that he learned the business of a button or buckle maker. It was more probably the former, though so far as I have ascertained, only one of his biographers has adapted this view. His new relations brought him into contact with people whose social and religious ideals were congenial. In his new master's household he dwelt as a member of the family and set earnestly about the task of learning his trade. Here is the Pauline precedent. The saddle-maker of the Staffordshire strikes on the beginning level of the tent-maker of Tarsus. The affinity between apostolicity and apostolicity and labor is ancient and continuous. The master workman in spiritual things is shadowed forth in the growing skill of the apprentice who honors his craft. That Asbury would in time have made a master saddler may well be supposed, but God had another use for this untaught son of the peasant, and was soon to give him a token of that choice. However, at this time there was neither sign nor voice, and the youth had settled down to contentment with his lot. No intellectual longing or dream of ambition visited him. Indeed, it is likely that the moiety of learning acquired in childhood was, with the dreams of infancy, becoming irrelevant. Amid the listlessness of toilful and bookless days, these are the conditions under which the brain becomes sluggish and the pain of desire is soothed into indifference. Here begins the inertia of those millions who live and die without giving a sign. This is not the place to assess the intellectual powers of Asbury, but a reference to his healthy mentality properly comes in here. In spite of the cruel treatment received at the hands of a churlish schoolmaster, the lad showed an early, though not extraordinary, aptitude for letters, but the exceptional quality, the real precocity of his taste was in his choice of reading, though we cannot know how much of this was necessity. We can not know if any brave tales of we cannot know if any brave tales of adventure, any high-drawn romances were brought within his reach to be turned down for those serious and solid volumes which first entranced his soul. The genius of Asbury, if genius had beyond the art of taking pains, was in the ethereally ethical element of his thought. The Galilean light shone through them. Had there been a record of these thoughts in childhood, or had his peasant surroundings afforded any chance for their expression, then indeed might a prophecy of his future goings have been read. But even the mother heart that warmed with unutterable tenderness the life of his own could not read out the secret of the days of her son. To see him come in blamelessness to maturity, and filling at last the room of his father as the servant of a gentleman or the keeper of his horse and hounds, was all she knew or dared to dream for him. His peasant lineage transmitted to the future bishop a sinewy and well-knit frame, though in America Asbury's body early became the prey of diseases that slowly sapped his strength. He was by nature healthy and strong-fibered. No other supposition can account for the 53 years of incessant labors and hardships which he endured as an itinerant evangelist, 45 of which were spent on the rough, wide floor of the American continent, in traveling over which he averaged not less than 5 to 6,000 miles per year. The maladies from which he had so sorely and constantly suffered in America had their origin in the plentiful malaria which he absorbed during the first years of his itinerant service in the lowlands of Maryland. A wiser regimen and a better medical advice would no doubt have saved him years of suffering and preserved him in strength to the end of his days. The testimony is that in his youth the measures of sunshine and English day built into his frame shone out in a ruddy comeliness, and that to see him was to mark the heritage of a body destined to a goodly use, described in latter life as tall, thin, and gaunt, with the face and air of a soldier whose toils had wasted early strength and impaired youthful beauty. He was in younger manhood a figure that suggested athletic vigor, veiled with the contemplative matter of the eremite and saint. Thus I have considered and put as far as may be possible into the constant outline of what is certainly known, considering the infancy and boyhood of one of the most noteworthy men of the latter Christian ages, a man to whom was opened such a door as seldom invites to even gospel labors, a man who, measured by the extent and results of his ministry, is preeminently entitled to be named an apostle, and yet a man, it may be repeated, upon whom heaven stole unawares with its blessings and honors. When entering upon his 14th year, and having settled down to the life of a settler's apprentice, he was without other pledge than that which covered the lives of his fellow peasants, and without monitor our impulse to recall him from the intellectual indifference into which he had been banished by the ferule of a cruel pedagogue. But a new and sudden influence was about to set his feet in wider paths. And, well, that's what puberty does to you, is your own morality, your ability to choose your own system, but honoring the involvement in the simple, the basic, the common tasks of work, and this labor that you maintain your spiritual consciousness. That is higher than the jobs of clergy, I would say. And someone who traveled so much, that's yeah, you have to have physical fitness.